Hey guys, welcome to Why and Our Daily Update YouTube channel. Today's topics: how Phyllis and Cain crashed and burned before they started on Young and the Restless. In Genoa City, where love stories ignite and implode faster than Newman Enterprises can launch a hostile takeover, few almost romances have generated as much curiosity or controversy as the near affair between Phyllis Summers and Cain Ashby. It was a storyline that flirted with becoming combustible, promising danger, passion, betrayal, and vengeance, but instead, it collapsed before it even had the chance to fully burn. What made this pseudo-pairing so magnetic wasn't simply the chemistry, it was the timing, the emotional wreckage surrounding both characters, and the implication that two people, running from their own personal crises, could collide in a way that neither expected. But to truly understand how this thing between them fell apart before it even began, we have to step back into the emotional state of each character. At the time, Phyllis Summers was navigating the kind of heartbreak that shakes anyone to the core, even someone as fiery and self-assured as her. After her relationship with Nick had fractured beyond repair, and her desire for stability seemed to slip from her grasp, Phyllis found herself spiraling in decision-making, vulnerability, and the impulsive behavior fans know all too well. And then there was Cain Ashby, the perennial good guy, the man known for loyalty, honesty, and dependability, a character with a history of personal reinvention, internal conflicts, and sacrifices. But during this point in the story, Cain was a man on shaky ground. His marriage to Lily was unraveling, not because he wanted it to, but because emotional distance, resentment, and poor choices had created a chasm he didn't know how to fix. So here they were, two emotionally unstable, deeply wounded individuals who appeared on a collision course. And for a moment, the audience wondered, could these two actually end up together? Should they? Would this destroy everything they both had left? The show teased the possibility like a slow-burning fuse. Phyllis, still reeling from heartbreak and feeling disconnected from her usual support systems, spiraled into decisions driven more by emotion than logic. Meanwhile, Cain, fragile, drifting, desperate for connection, found in her someone who understood disappointment in a way few others did. Their scenes were cautious, but charged, brief glances, accidental touches, and hushed conversations where vulnerability felt like a shared language. It was a pairing that wasn't supposed to make sense, yet it did, in the chaotic, messy, beautifully unpredictable way that soap pairings sometimes do. But if there's one thing that Genoa City has taught fans, it's that chemistry alone isn't enough. Timing matters, circumstances matter, the weight of past decisions matters. And in this case, the universe, or perhaps the writers, seemed determined to extinguish the spark before it grew into a fire that could consume everything in its path. The beginning of the end, or rather, the end of the beginning, happened with a kiss. A moment that should have felt like confirmation but instead became a turning point where everything unraveled. In that moment, Cain and Phyllis realized that the attraction wasn't just about chemistry. It was about grief. It was about loneliness. It was about distraction. It was about escaping the crushing reality that neither of them knew how to face. When their lips met, the truth became painfully clear. This wasn't passion. It was desperation. And desperation is the most volatile element in Genoa City. The aftermath of the kiss was awkward, messy, and emotionally charged. Cain, stunned by what he had done, recoiled with guilt. Phyllis, both embarrassed and angry with herself, lashed out in typical Phyllis fashion, sharp, defensive, and determined not to let anyone see how deeply she felt the mistake. The beauty of their almost romance was how relatable it was. How many times have two people both broken, both searching, mistaken connection for comfort? How many times has a moment of vulnerability been misread as something more? The kiss didn't create their downfall. It revealed it. Because underneath everything were the problems that neither Cain nor Phyllis could outrun. Phyllis was still in love with Nick. Cain was still in love with Lily, and neither was in a place to love someone new. The storyline didn't crash because it lacked potential. It crashed because the timing was catastrophic. Yet the hesitation, the ripple effect, and the emotional chaos the moment created were powerful enough to spark intense fan debate. Was Phyllis trying to hurt someone, or heal herself? Was Cain succumbing to temptation, or was he simply unraveling under pressure? The truth was something in the middle, a truth that made their short-lived connection even more compelling. Because in that messy, complicated moment, two people with fractured hearts almost destroyed themselves, not through passion but through pain. And somehow, the most dramatic part wasn't what happened, it was what did in single quotes. The emotional minefields beneath the surface. To understand why Cain and Phyllis imploded before they even officially began, we have to look deeper into the unresolved wounds. psychological patterns, and emotional baggage each character carried into their almost affair. Phyllis Summers. A woman running from herself. When Phyllis is emotionally stable, she is one of the smartest, most strategic, most powerful characters in Genoa City, but when she is spiraling, she becomes her own worst enemy. The Phyllis we saw during this arc was someone who couldn't process abandonment without responding with impulsive rebellion. When Nick pulled away emotionally, when their relationship began to collapse under the weight of mistrust and incompatible priorities, Phyllis began looking for an escape hatch. She didn't want connection, she wanted relief. Kane accidentally provided it. Phyllis's entire history is built around survival. She loves deeply, fights fiercely, and demands loyalty. But when she loses the things she values, she reacts not by grieving slowly, but by detonating emotionally. Every time Phyllis faces heartbreak, she makes a decision that changes the trajectory of her life, often in ways she later regrets. So when Kane crossed her orbit during this vulnerable period, she didn't evaluate him as a potential partner. She saw a momentary refuge from the storm. Inside her, what she didn't anticipate was that Kane was equally unstable and equally emotionally depleted at exactly the same time. Kane Ashby, the good man, who couldn't save himself. Kane has always been the kind of man who wants to do the right thing, even when he fails at it. His love for Lily shaped him, grounded him, and defined him. But in the moment he fell apart with her, Kane found himself drifting with no anchor. He was living through the emotional whiplash of a collapsing marriage, playing tug-of-war between guilt and resentment. Lily was hurt, he was hurting. Their communication had deteriorated. They both wanted reconciliation but weren't emotionally equipped to make it happen. It was the classic soap breakdown, not explosive, but gradual, almost invisible in many ways. The loneliness Kane felt was more dangerous than anger, because loneliness makes people susceptible to temptation. When he and Phyllis shared their vulnerable conversations, it was the first time Kane felt truly seen, not as Lily's husband, not as the moral center of the Ashby family, but as a flawed man trying to piece himself together. The emotional weight he carried made him gravitate toward Phyllis, who, in her blunt, unfiltered way, understood the pain of losing the life you thought you deserved. Their emotional patterns collided, not their hearts. Phyllis has a pattern. When she is hurt, she seeks chaos. When she is lonely, she seeks validation. When she feels betrayed, she seeks someone who can reflect her pain back at her. Kane has a pattern. When he is rejected, he retreats. When he is overwhelmed, he makes impulsive decisions. When he feels powerless, he seeks comfort from anyone who listens. When these two emotional patterns collided, it wasn't romance, it was an emotional implosion waiting to happen. Fans could feel the tension. The show could feel the tension. Even Kane and Phyllis themselves could sense the danger. The illusion of attraction. Kane and Phyllis were not attracted to each other. Not truly. What they were attracted to was the illusion of distraction. To Kane, Phyllis represented freedom from his suffocating guilt. To Phyllis, Kane represented validation when she felt unwanted and undervalued. The kiss, the spark the writers dangled, was the visual manifestation of their emotional collapse. The moment their lips touched, the illusion shattered. Suddenly, Kane realized he was cheating emotionally with a woman he didn't actually want. Phyllis realized she wasn't moving on, she was spiraling downward, and both realized the consequences would be catastrophic. Their almost romance didn't crash because it lacked chemistry. It crashed because it lacked emotional foundation. Fallout, guilt, and the wreckage left behind. The crash and burn didn't end at the kiss. In fact, that moment only triggered a chain reaction that made things worse for both characters. The guilt consumed Kane's entire identity revolved around being a devoted husband. The moment he crossed the boundary with Phyllis, however minor, he knew he had betrayed Lily emotionally. Even if the world never found out, he knew. And for Kane, internal guilt is far more destructive than external consequences. His self-esteem plummeted. He withdrew emotionally. He began punishing himself in ways subtle and overt. The tragedy, Lily interpreted Kane's withdrawal as emotional detachment, validating her own insecurities. Thus, their marriage crumbled further. Not because Kane didn't love her, but because he couldn't forgive himself long enough to fight for her. Phyllis retreats into defensiveness. Phyllis also responded exactly as fans expected. She doubled down in defensiveness. When she feels cornered or ashamed, she hides her vulnerability behind snark, aggression, and impulsive decisions. The Kane incident triggered an emotional spiral. She became more reckless. She pushed away allies. She convinced herself she didn't care when she cared deeply, and she made choices that created even bigger problems. Her dynamic with Nick grew tense. Her relationship with her daughter became strained. Her public behavior turned erratic. Everything she did after that kiss was a reaction not to Kane, but to the shame she felt for letting herself get that lost. The aftershocks spread through Genoa City even though Kane and Phyllis never officially became a couple. The aftershocks spread to multiple characters. Lily, confused, hurt, and heartbroken, grew more distant. Nick, sensing Phyllis had emotionally drifted, shut down. Billy, who still harbored feelings for Phyllis, became suspicious. Jill, always protective of Kane, sensed something was off. The relationship that never happened still caused consequences. Because emotional betrayals are still betrayals. Because pain doesn't need a label to be real. Because guilt leaves a trail even when secrets stay hidden. Why fans were torn. And why the pairing was doomed. Soap audiences are perceptive. They know when a pairing has potential, when it's toxic, when it's compelling, and when it's doomed before it even leaves the dock. The reaction to Phyllis and Kane was mixed passionately. So why some fans wanted it. A group of viewers argued that a Kane-Phyllis pairing could have worked because both characters were vulnerable. Both needed a storyline shake-up. Both had unmatched intensity on screen. And both could have ignited a storyline that blew up multiple families. The possibility of chaos was intoxicating. Why? Most fans opposed it, but overwhelmingly, fans pointed out the fundamental issues. Kane was still in love with Lily. Phyllis was not emotionally available. Their chemistry was circumstantial, not organic. The storyline felt like a plot detour, not a long-term arc. Most importantly, they would have destroyed each other, and in Genoa City, destruction may make for good TV, but it doesn't always make for good romance. The writer's intent became clearing soap operas. Pairings are deliberate, the chemistry may be organic, but the direction is chosen, and quickly, it became apparent that Kane and Phyllis were never meant to become a true couple. The storyline existed to push Kane and Lily further into crisis. Highlight Phyllis's emotional unraveling, demonstrate the danger of impulsive decisions, add chaos to multiple arcs at once. In other words, the pairing was a plot device, not a love story. The legacy of a love story that never happened. Even though Kane and Phyllis never became a couple, their almost romance remains one of the most interesting what-ifs in Young and the Restless history. The moment that defined the non-relationship fans can still recall the kiss, awkward, painful, loaded, not because it was romantic, but because it was brutally honest. It exposed everything both characters were trying to hide, their insecurity, their heartbreak, their longing for validation, their refusal to confront their real problems. In that moment, Kane and Phyllis represented something rare in soaps. Two broken people who didn't need each other, they needed healing. How it shaped their future arcs after their collapse. Both characters eventually rebuilt themselves. Kane refocused on his family and personal redemption. Phyllis reclaimed her strength, identity, and fiery determination. It took time and many mistakes, but both came out stronger. Ironically, the kiss that almost began a romance became the catalyst for personal transformation. Why it still matters. Soap history isn't only shaped by the couples who end up together. It's shaped by the couples who almost did but shouldn't have. Kane and Phyllis remind viewers that not every spark becomes a fire. Not every attraction becomes a love story. Not every vulnerable moment becomes destiny. Sometimes, the most powerful story is the one that doesn't happen. A crash without a beginning. A story without an ending. Their relationship ended before it began. But in that brief moment, Kane and Phyllis showed audiences a raw, unfiltered side of love. Love that comes from loneliness, not connection. Love that comes from wounds, not healing. Love that comes from longing, not compatibility. And that is why their near romance remains unforgettable.